Today's challenge is to replace both rear axles in a BMW E61 530xi. It's all-wheel drive, but it should be the same as a 530i. There's a little difference between the sedan and the wagon, but it's really only in getting the axle in and out around the other components. So it should be 95% similar for a sedan or a wagon. So I will show you the process. Okay, first you're going to want to remove the cap to get access to the axle nut, because that's got to come out. You can see how the axle nut itself is peened down inside that at 12 o'clock and 6 o'clock a little bit less at the notches in the axle shaft itself. That's to keep it from rotating. This particular one is a aftermarket nut which has much thicker shoulders, so they didn't get pushed down too far because they're much stiffer. We've got to take those dimples out, and let's do that next. Okay, you may or may not be able to do this with the wheel in place. You will need to exercise caution. This one's a little worse because I have a little bit of a spacer back here, but basically just gently tap to remove the dimples so you can take the nut off. Okay, you'll need a special socket to take the nuts off. The originals on the car tend to be 34 millimeter. The replacement that I got last time was a 36, so know which one you've got so you know which tools to get. You can get the whole set for a chump change from your all the local suspects, Amazon, whatever. So in this case, it's a 12-point impact rated socket. The nut is torqued to 300 plus foot-pounds, so it's going to take some violence to get it off. I like to use an impact wrench. You can use a breaker bar and maybe an extension, depending on how much you weigh and how strong you are. But you'll need to put some serious twist on it. And I'm lazy, so I'm going to use an electric impact. It's rated to about 1,000 foot-pounds removing, which is the top trigger, and about 300 foot-pounds installing. So with any luck, this will come right off. Easy peasy. Next, lift the car with an appropriate floor jack. I use that center support section on the wagon. Sedan, I believe you would use the differential, but get both wheels up in the air and put jack stands under it. Okay, now that the car is safely supported on jack stands, remove the wheels. And because this is a BMW, there's more special tools you'll need. In this case, you'll need a set of E-Torx. Basically, it's like a torque wrench, only backwards. Sockets, E-sockets. In this case, you're going to use the E12 socket to remove the bolts from the inside of the drive shaft, where it bolts onto the differential, which you can't really see from here. There are a couple ways to do that. Okay, you can crawl under the car and get pretty good access to the bolts, which you can see right there. The only downside is that the bellows on the CV axle are kind of in the way, and you're fighting them, and you don't have a good angle. When possible, I like to work on this from outside, where I actually come in from above the brake caliper this direction and reach them, and you can see the axle is angled down out of your way instead of in your way. And there's another reason that is a better solution, and I'll show you why when it comes to keeping the axle from rotating while you're undoing the bolts. As soon as you put any torque at all on those axle bolts, it's going to rotate the wheel, the hub rather, since there's nothing to keep it from moving. The easy way to keep this from happening is just slide a screwdriver into the slot through your caliper here. So there's really no way for it to rotate, and that way you've locked it in place with an easy to change situation. You don't have to get in the car and set the emergency brake or anything silly like that. You just change the position of the axle and then repin it with a screwdriver and continue on around the axle. Okay, now you can see the got my ratchet on one of the leftmost axle nuts, and I just back it out. And they're fairly long, and they won't come out all together out of the housing. So just let it hang there, and then, if possible, wiggle the socket off of the wrench, off of the bolt, rotate it, and then stick the screwdriver back in into the brake rotor, slip the socket back onto the next bolt, and continue until you've gone around the circle and gotten them all. Okay, so now here's what it looks like feeding the socket into place. I've got about 2 feet of extensions, including a couple wobbles, all lined up here. Make sure you get the socket good and centered over the bolt. Okay, once it's all in place, then you just twist on your ratchet, break it loose, and spin it out. I'm doing this from sitting outside the car, which is, in my mind, a lot easier than laying under the car and fighting with the bellows, the CV boot joint, CV boot. And if you prefer to lie on your back, this is pretty much what the process looks like. All right, now that all the bolts are loose, if you're lucky, your axle is now loose at the differential. You can see this one is. It's been out recently when I did a full rear suspension replacement, minus the axle. Otherwise, you may have to use a little bit of violence, hammer, put a chisel or screwdriver in the seam between the two. I believe there's a slot for that. If not, just use a sharp edge up against the axle and push it out. And then you should have enough slack to be able to get it out. Now that's the question here, is whether I'll have enough room to swivel this axle out of position to be able to get it in and out without dropping anything else. This is a Wagon. It's a little different, and the exhaust side is a little different than the non-exhaust side over there. So I'm going to try to do this as easy as I can with as few steps as possible, and let you know how it works out so you don't have to go to any extra steps. Okay, easy enough. I just wiggled it out. I actually rotated the axle, and it just walked it up and out of the axle shaft. The differential cup rather. So it's now loose over here. I have quite a bit of freedom of movement. Again, this is the left side axle that has the exhaust in the way, and the other axle should be even easier. This is the other, yeah, that just popped right out. So this one, I believe, I won't have to do anything else to get in and out. But I'll basically watch the video. You'll know how to get both of them out. All right, here is the step that could be really simple or really complicated. Getting the axle shaft pushed through the hub. You can see the splines in between the two. Very often, and on this car particularly, it took me hours to get this one loose the first time. And because of the rust that had formed in there, it hadn't been out in the car's 16-year lifespan. So it was a bear. It took a 10-ton press, 2 torches, and an air chisel. However, it's been cleaned up, greased, and reinserted, so it should probably come out with nothing more than just a using a punch. I'm going to take the spacer off. Should come out with just a punch, and it is. It's moving right on out. So that's the best case. The worst case is you'll at least need a press that bolts to the. There's a couple different styles. One has a press that bolts here with a threaded shaft that pushes the axle. That's good if it's not too rusty. Otherwise, reference the video that I made on getting a really rusty axle out. And it's good for a laugh if nothing else. But if you run into that trouble, you'll want to watch it. Alright, I was hoping for better, but there is absolutely no way that I can wiggle that axle out of the way with the exhaust, the rear bracing that's probably unique to the Wagon version, the touring version. Could be on a sedan, dropping the exhaust would be enough. But in this case, I think probably the easiest thing to do is going to be to unbolt this bolt here, which runs through to the other side here, which is going to allow me to rotate the whole knuckle up and out just enough, I believe, to get me the clearance I need. If I can drop this out of the way, and I may have to unbolt the this could be important. This is the ride height sensor. You don't want to break this. It'd be a pain in the butt to replace. So I'll probably undo that to make sure I don't hurt anything, and I'll possibly have to drop the shock as well. And or the anti-sway, if that keeps me from moving it where I need to move it. But let's take it apart as little as possible. I'm going to take the bolt out and see where that gets me. Okay, and before I get too carried away there, I don't want to take that all the way off. I have to air down the suspension. And I have to remove this right rear panel under here that has a number of these 10 millimeter plastic bolts. 1, 2, there's supposed to be one there, 3, and then plus this 8 millimeter metal bolt there. So take that panel off first. Okay, there's also one bolt that's holding the inside edge on the inside of the fender well liner. So don't forget that 8 millimeter bolt as well. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and air down both bags just for convenience. You're going to want to remove this this plug here, which is somewhat in the way. It just wiggles out. The next thing, you've got these two 10 millimeter pneumatic attachments that go to each of the airbags. The red goes to the driver's or the left side, in the US anyway. Blue goes to the right side. You just want to crack them both off so that they lose pressure. By unplugging this, it's going to prevent it from trying to remedy that by running the compressor all the time. So get yourself a 10 millimeter wrench and we'll get started. Okay, now these lines are old, so be gentle and try to not torque them any worse than is absolutely necessary to get them loose, and just undo them enough that you hear air starting to escape, because that will air them down in pretty short order. So okay, and there's the red one leaking prodigiously. The right one's a little harder to get to, the red one rather, which is the left side. So it's a little fiddly, but just keep working it, you'll get it loose. Okay, I've now removed the long bolt that went through that lower suspension, and I took off the shock bolt as well, just so there wouldn't be any pressure on that. I've got Alright, the right side looks to be a lot simpler. I literally just unbolted it and slide it out, which is what it'd be like on a sedan, or if you're just replacing the right side rear axle. It's only the left one that gives you the problems. Okay, the next step The next step is to just put the axles side by side, make sure they look like they do the same thing, reasonably so. Looks pretty much the same. So the next trick is to transfer the bolts and these keepers from the old axles to the new axles, and you'll probably have to pull the bolts out one at a time to get that done, and then just move them over to the new axles, and they should go in just the same way. Fiddly because of the clearance to these CV boots, but they are rubber, so they move. So repeat until they're all in place. I put a little bit of grease on the threads of the bolts just to make them easier to get in and out next time, and also around the periphery of the actual axle interface, the differential to axle interface. I noticed that they're a little different. They're basically the same axle, but probably different run. I'm assuming that's not really going to matter. They both seem to have the same diameter from the old ones to the new ones. This one just has this extra lip, which probably doesn't do anything. It's just that this part's built a little different. So I'll let you know if that runs into any issues. Okay, sliding the right axle in should basically be as easy as feeding it into the toward the hub until it's, have to point the nose down just a little bit. Okay, get lined up in there, and it's actually pretty close to in. It's the thing that's keeping me from going any further is it's basically just back a fraction of an inch too far here, and I might even be able to work around that, but it will be fine once I actually press the axle into place. So I'll show you how to do that next. Okay, and like any good BMW job, you're going to need other special tools, and in this case there's it's a puller designed specifically to pull axles through the hub, and you can see the end of the axle is sitting right down pretty flush with the end of the hub there. You're going to use this M27 socket, which threads onto the axle itself. It's got a very thin wall, so it fits in between there. And then this the puller goes in so that it threads into the end of that socket. Okay, and thread it all the way in. Let's not stress anything out. Okay, and once you got that threaded in, it's just a matter of tightening down this nut here, which will serve to pull the axle through the hub itself. Now, I suspected, and seems to be the case, I don't even need a wrench really. It's snug, but it's definitely pulling through. So to finish it off, I'm going to get the wrench to pull it all the way through the hub. And pull it till it's nice and snug, and that should have the axle adequately through the hub, so that you can install the big 12-point nut to do the final installation. Okay, take the puller off. Take the nut off, and you can see the axle is now sticking through, which, with any luck at all, means that we've got more than enough room to go ahead and move the axle into place, which we do. So now I just have to get the bolts lined up and started, and get everything tightened on this side. Okay, now I'm just going to try to thread the left side axle back through the hole from whence it came. And notice I've got rags between my knees and the dust shield for the brake rotor. So basically, once you get it in here close, you can release it and then just work on lining up the axle stub with the hub itself, the splines in the hub, so you can slide it forward and get the clearance you need to push the other end into place. It's kind of a process, but not difficult, just a little fiddly. Okay, like the other side, we've got the axle about flush with the face of the hub, and the rear of the axle, the differential side, is sitting in the depression in the differential, so it's just a matter of pulling this one through just like the other side and getting those bolts started just like the other side. Next step will be to get this this bolt back through that hole. You can see the pieces aren't lining up that well. I've put a floor jack here just to give me something to push against and to give me a point of reference. Basically what I'm going to do is try to unweight this whole assembly so that I can line those up more effectively. And in this case, it's actually easier to push that down. You can see I've got the hole partially lined up. Old mechanics trick here is, once you've got that, you can use a screwdriver or a similar tool to get the hole lined up. You can see the bolt is nearly in. The thing that's stopping me now is that there's just a slight misalignment on this side. Again, I'm going to use the floor jack to push up on this this portion that's a little bit low. Just get a little bit of a push to line it up with the lower control arm there, the crossbone, the wishbone, that's what it's called, and get it lined up and get the bolt through. Alright, so it's basically, you can see that I raised it just a little bit, wiggled it around, tapped it into place. Pretty soon you've got alignment and you can start putting the nut back on. Okay, and this is, do not tighten this all the way down until you have this entire swing arm here at ride height. If you do, you're gonna bolt the bushings down tight in the position with the suspension extended all the way down. When you raise it back up to road height, which is where it spends the rest of its life, those bushings are going to be twisted and under great stress. They're going to fail quickly. The performance isn't going to be right. So you'll want to raise the swing arm back up to ride height and then put the final tightening on this this 18 and 24 millimeter bolt nut combination. Okay, I've used the jack to raise the suspension to ride height, put the 18 millimeter wrench in place to hold the bolt. It's up against the jack, so it's not going to go anywhere. I'm using a torque wrench to tighten down, do the final tightening on the 24 millimeter nut, which is set to proper torque for BMW. Look it up on yours. It's probably around 120 foot-pounds, so that's pretty dang tight. So just make sure you get that done. There we go, done properly. And once again, using the screwdriver and the rotor trick, thread your extensions or crawl underneath, whatever you want to do, and put a final tightening on the 6 bolts on each of the axles to final torque spec, and you'll need to look that up. It could vary by axle, so I don't want to give you the wrong information. Strangely enough, although these axles are same brand and apparently same vintage, you can clearly see they're different sizes. Where this one is the going to be the 36 millimeter variety. This one's not the 34 millimeter original. It's a 32 millimeter 12-point nut. So I will be swapping out to that to drive this on. And no worries about getting it too tight. This this particular wrench will only produce about 300 foot-pounds of tightening torque, so it's not going to overdo it. But you can see the nut is down. What I haven't done is driven the little dents into it, and it's not fully torqued yet, so a couple steps left to go. Okay, another little bit of house keeping here. Before you plug everything back together, make sure the slot in the post underneath here is lined up with the corresponding slot on this this plastic, yes, it's plastic, bit at the bottom here, so that whenever you actually put the car back together and you drop it onto its wheels and you air up these airbags, they will end up in the right position and not kind of crimped up on a you know, a little bit crooked because they didn't seat fully. And you want to check that after you do put it back together to make sure it's all good. Speaking of which, it's now time to get back to your old friends, the pneumatic lines here coming out of the leveling system. So tighten them down. I'm tightening them finger tight first since that's easier than using the wrench, and then fully snug them down. They don't have to be gorilla tight, but they do have to be airtight, so that means plenty tight. Make sure they're good and snug against the device here that they're coming out of, the solenoid, so that you won't have an air leak, because then you'll be taking this panel back off and redoing this all. The next step is to get the car up and off the jack stands. So I've raised it just a little bit more, and we'll pull the jack stands out. Okay, this being a wagon, there's an extra step. I'm going to lower it, hopefully gently, down just a little bit so that I can basically get it below the point where it's going to need to kick on the airbags to raise the car up to the proper ride height. I've got to do that with two hands though. Okay, the car is now sitting down well below normal ride height, which will trigger the suspension to want to kick on here. It's telling me there's some things going on, which doesn't surprise me a bit. I have a level control system malfunction, which is because it was turned on with the thing unplugged. I'm going to turn the ignition off and back on, and there we go. And it immediately starts pumping, and it's going to be raising, hopefully, the car back to normal ride height. You sedan folks don't have to sit through this particular process, but it's a feature and or a problem in the wagon depending on if it's working or not. So it's raising up. It will give me the opportunity to climb under, make sure the bags are seated properly, and make sure it's not leaking. That's why I left that panel off. Okay, and as hoped, that airbag on the left side is sitting absolutely flush. The airbag on the right side is sitting flush, and more importantly, we're not getting any leaks out of our lines. So we have accomplished getting the suspension back together. Okay, the panel is back in place over the air compressor. It's time to drop this off the jack and finish the axle bolts nuts. Okay, with the car on the ground, it's now possible to fully torque the axle nuts to 310 foot-pounds, which I'm going to start with the my impact, which will go to no higher than that. And finish off with a torque wrench. Okay, both nuts tightened down fully. We're done, right? No, you're not. One more step. You got to get the back of the car back up in the air and take the wheels off. Okay, the next step is to drive, put a little dent here at these notches in the axle to keep the axle nut from spinning. You can see I've made a couple attempts at this one already. It's getting a little boogered up, which shouldn't really be a problem. The last one really wasn't very well driven either, because these shoulders are so thick they just do not want to deform. But as long as you get enough material deformed down there into the notch, it's not going to go anywhere. It's torqued to 300 and some foot-pounds anyway, so it should be good. So I'm going to go ahead and do a corresponding notch on the bottom as best I can and call it a day. All right, not pretty, but there's enough of a deformation on both notches that it's not going to turn. It wouldn't anyway, but safety first. So again, we can double check our work, make sure the airbag is seated properly with the suspension all the way up. Nothing left to do but put the wheels on, drop it on the ground, and go drive it around. And then to finish it up, get your torque wrench out and tighten all the lug nuts to the proper tension. Using a star pattern. And finish it off. And you're good to go.